Let's review the correct answers. Number 1. What caused the Japanese-US relations to sour? Select all that apply. A. The Japanese were expanding their territory into British-held China. C. The U.S. began an embargo of airplane fuel against Japan. Number 2. Why did Stalin want Great Britain and the United States to invade France? B. To ease pressure on the Eastern Front. Marginalized groups in World War II. Learning objective: race and ethnicity. Examine the varied roles race and ethnicity played during the Second World War, including as a causative factor of both the global war and violent division on the American home front, and explore how Black Americans sought to redefine their place in society during and after the war. Learning objective: gender. Describe the experience of women during World War II from both a military and domestic perspective, and evaluate how gendered expectations changed following the conclusion of the war. For this lesson, you will need paper, pen or pencil, computer or mobile device, headphones. You may move at your own pace. Feel free to pause or rewind the video as needed. Agenda. I do. Introduction. We do. Guided reading. You do. Check for understanding and lesson review. As we move through the lesson, consider this guiding question. What contributions did marginalized groups make to the war effort? Native Americans. During World War I and World War II, the U.S. military used Native Americans to send encoded messages. Native Americans like Chester Nez were a group of 29 Navajo code talkers. They developed a code using the Navajo language that could not be broken by the Japanese. The code was so successful that a school was built on a military base in California to educate enlisted or drafted Native Americans in the ways of this top secret code. Chester Nez and the Native American Code Talkers are just one example of the marginalized groups of men and women who, despite not having equal rights, made significant contributions to the war effort at home and on the battlefields. Check for understanding. Number 1. Why was it important for the military to have an unbreakable code? Number 2. How is modern-day encryption like an unbreakable code? African Americans. World War II affected nearly every aspect of life in the United States, and America's racial relationships were not immune. More than 1 million African Americans fought in the war. Most black servicemen served in segregated, non combat units led by white officers. Some gains were made, however. The all black pilot squadrons, known as the Tuskegee Airmen, completed more than 1,500 missions, escorted heavy bombers into Germany, and earned several hundred merits and medals. The United States and its allies had adopted a V for Victory campaign. Activists proposed that the colored Americans adopt the double V for double victory. Black soldiers would fight fascism on the battlefield and would fight racial discrimination at home in the United States. Near the end of the war, the Army and Navy began integrating some of their units and facilities before the U.S. government finally ordered the full integration of its armed forces in 1948. Many black Americans saw the war as an opportunity not only to serve their country, but improve it. During the war, membership of the NAACP jumped tenfold, from 50,000 to 500,000. The Congress of Racial Equality was formed in 1942 and spearheaded the method of nonviolent direct action to achieve desegregation. Between 1940 and 1950, some 1.5 million black Southerners, the largest number of any decade since the beginning of the Great Migration, also indirectly demonstrated their opposition to racism and violence by migrating out of the Jim Crow South to the North. But transitions were not easy. Racial tensions erupt in 1943 in a series of riots in cities such as Mobile, Beaumont, and Harlem. The bloodiest race riot occurred in Detroit and resulted in the death of 25 black and 9 white Americans. Still, the war ignited in African Americans an urgency for equality that they would carry with them into the subsequent years. Check for understanding. Number 3. Describe some of the gains made by segregated combat units. Number 4. Explain the double victory or double V campaign. Japanese Americans. America's entry into the war left foreign nationals from the belligerent nations in a precarious position. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, all Japanese Americans were classified as enemy aliens, regardless of residency or citizenship status. The Federal Bureau of Investigation targeted many on suspicions of disloyalty for detainment, hearings, and possible internment under the Alien Enemy Act. Japanese Americans were arrested and sent to government internment camps secured by barbed wire and armed guards. They were placed under the custody of the War Relocation Authority, the civil agency that supervised their relocation to internment camps. They lost their homes and jobs. This policy of mass exclusion and detention affected over 110,000 Japanese and Japanese descended individuals. 70,000 were American citizens. In January 1943, President Roosevelt decided to allow these Japanese Americans to volunteer in the war. In May 1943, approximately 1,500 volunteers from the mainland and 3,000 volunteers from Hawaii assembled for training at Camp Shelby, Mississippi. These troops fought in 8 major campaigns in Italy, France, and Germany. In less than 2 years of combat, the 442nd Regimental Combat Unit earned more than 18,000 honors, including 1 Medal of Honor, 53 Distinguished Service Crosses, 588 Silver Star, 5,200 Bronze Star medals, 9,486 Purple Hearts, and 8 Presidential Unit Citations, the nation's top award for combat units. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team is the most decorated unit in U.S. military history. In 1988, President Reagan signed a law that formally apologized for the internment of Japanese Americans and provided financial reparations to surviving internees. Check for understanding. Number 5. Describe the function of the U.S. internment camps. Number 6. How many Japanese Americans interned in camps were American citizens? Jewish refugees. If actions like the internment of Japanese Americans would later prove repugnant, so too could inaction. As the Allies pushed into Germany and Poland, they uncovered the full extent of Hitler's genocidal atrocities. The Allies liberated massive camp systems set up for the imprisonment, forced labor, and extermination of all those deemed racially, ideologically, or biologically unfit by Nazi Germany. But the Holocaust, the systematic murder of 11 million civilians, including 6 million Jews, had been underway for years. How did America respond? Initially, American officials expressed little official concern for Nazi persecution. At first signs of trouble in the 1930s, the State Department and most U.S. embassies did relatively little to aid European Jews. Roosevelt publicly spoke out against the persecution and even withdrew the U.S. ambassador to Germany after Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. Nevertheless, the United States turned away countless Jewish refugees who requested asylum in the United States. In 1939, the German ship St. Louis carried over 900 Jewish refugees. They could not find a country that would take them. The passengers could not receive visas under the U.S. quota system. A State Department wire to one passenger read that all must await their turns on the waiting list and qualify for and obtain immigration visas before they may be admissible into the United States. The ship cabled the president for special privileges, but the president said nothing. The ship was forced to return to Europe. Hundreds of the St. Louis's passengers would perish in the Holocaust. Knowledge of the full extent of the Holocaust was slow in coming. When the war began, American officials, including Roosevelt, doubted initial reports of industrial death camps. But even when they conceded to their existence, officials pointed to their genuinely limited options. The most plausible response for the U.S. military was to bomb either the camps or the railroads leading to them, but those options were rejected by military and civilian officials who argued it would do little to stop the deportations, would distract from the war effort, and could cause casualties among concentration camp prisoners. Whether bombing would have saved lives remains a hotly debated question. Check for understanding. Approximately how many people in total died in the death camps at the hands of the Nazis? Number 8. If the American public had known the extent of the Holocaust, would that have changed the fate of the passengers of the St. Louis? Number 9. What limited options did the U.S. government consider to intervene in the Holocaust? Women in the workforce. President Franklin D. Roosevelt and his administration encouraged all able bodied American women to help the war effort. He considered the role of women in the war critical for an American victory, and the public expected women to assume various functions to free men for active military service. While most women opted to remain at home or volunteer with charitable organizations, many went to work or donned military uniforms. World War II brought unprecedented labor opportunities for American women. Industrial labor, an occupational sphere dominated by men, shifted in part to women during the duration of the wartime mobilization. Women applied for jobs in converted munitions factories. The iconic illustrated image of Rosie the Riveter, a muscular woman dressed in coveralls with her hair in a handkerchief and inscribed with the phrase, "We can do it," came to stand for female factory labor during the war. For women who elected not to work, many volunteer opportunities presented themselves. The American Red Cross, the largest charitable organization in the nation, encouraged women to volunteer with local city chapters. Millions of women organized community social events for families, packed and shipped almost a half a million tons of medical supplies overseas, and prepared 27 million care packages of non perishable items for American and other Allied prisoners of war. The American Red Cross further required all female volunteers to certify as nurses' aides, providing an extra benefit and work opportunity for hospital staff that suffered severe personnel losses. Other charity organizations, such as church and synagogue affiliates, benevolent associations, and social club auxiliaries, gave women further outlets for volunteer work. Military service was another option for women who wanted to join the war effort. Over 350,000 women served in several all female units of the military branches. The Army and Navy Nurse Corps Reserves, the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, the Navy's women accepted for volunteer emergency service, the Coast Guard SPARS, named for the Coast Guard motto Semper Paratus, always ready, Marine Corps units gave women the opportunity to serve as either commissioned officers or enlisted members at military bases at home and abroad. The Nurse Corps Reserves alone commissioned 105,000 Army and Navy nurses recruited by the American Red Cross. Military nurses worked at base hospitals, mobile medical units, and onboard hospital mercy ships. For all of the post war celebration of Rosie the Riveter, after the war ended, the men returned and most women voluntarily left the workforce or lost their jobs. Meanwhile, former military women faced a litany of obstacles in obtaining veterans' benefits during their transition to civilian life. The nation that beckoned the call for assistance to millions of women during the 4 year crisis hardly stood ready to accommodate their post war needs and demands. Number 10. In what various ways did American women serve during World War II? Number 11. What did Rosie the Riveter become a symbol for? Number 12. Approximately how many women served in the military during World War II? Lesson Review. Describe the ways in which marginalized groups contributed to World War II and the struggles they faced. Homework. Define the key terms from this lesson. Add it to your learning objective review. Good job, Scholar. You have finished the lesson. Make sure your name, date, and class period are in the upper right-hand corner of your paper. Place your completed assignment in your class's tray.